Free your staff to focus on high-impact work while offering round-the-clock assistance to every student. With Element 451, you can deploy AI agents that reason, act, and provide support at scale, solving problems, analyzing data, and crafting personalized outreach instantly. These AI agents expand your team's abilities without replacing the human touch, allowing staff to dedicate their time to what matters most. Unlock the future of workforce enablement at element451.com.
A key flaw I have found in storytelling in higher ed is we so often just tell the story of the brand, and we don't think about stories from a segmentation perspective. One thing I would encourage folks to do when they think about storytelling is like look at the variety of your value propositions and ask yourself about the stories that are available for each of those.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your Monday morning energizer covering insights and trends in higher ed marketing and enrollment. I'm Mallory Wilsey, bringing over 15 years of ed tech and marketing expertise to your earbuds.
And I'm Seth Odell, joining the Pulse with my own adventures from leading marketing at top universities to founding Kanahoma, one of the industry's fastest growing digital marketing agencies.
Each week, we bring you the kind of insider insights you typically only find over cocktails with your pals at a conference.
It's fast, it's fun, and it's designed for you, the busy higher ed professional.
You're not just listening to another podcast.
You're checking the pulse of higher education.
Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher ed professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Seth, you just got back from a team retreat in New Orleans. Tell us all about it.
I did yesterday. Well, one, I'm like still exhausted, so I'm going to bring the energy today, but I'm tired. I took the whole agency to New Orleans. We do a retreat. We do a destination retreat each year. Then we often in the spring we'll get together in San Diego. So I took the whole agency to New Orleans. It was just awesome all the way around. We did a ghost tour in the French Quarter. We did a full day retreat where we got to be together in the room and talk a lot about stuff. We went and saw the Preservation Hall Jazz Band play. We had dinner at Brennan's, and we even did an airboat tour of the swamps. And so like we saw it all. We packed it in. New Orleans is such a great place. It's such a beautiful city, amazing people. So I don't think we saw it all, but we saw a lot. It was a really, really, really fun trip. I'm so blessed and lucky that we got to do that.
Do you know every time I try and go there, there's a hurricane? Literally every time in my life I've ever had a plane ticket, there's a hurricane.
You got to try again.
So I just stopped buying them because I was like, I'm clearly the cause.
I can tell you it is worth trying again. It's just such an awesome city. So I say get it back on the calendar, maybe even this year. It's worth it. And you can do a lot in a weekend. Like you can do a 3 or 4 night trip that's pretty amazing.
There's a couple industry events in New Orleans this year, and they are softly marked on my calendar. So I am keeping my fingers crossed and watching the weather.
Well, and I'll also say, if you are a conference organizer listening to this, it is one of the more friendly and affordable cities for events, too. It is a little harder for people to get to, which maybe is why they're so kind of welcoming from a cost perspective. But like, it's a great city to put on events if you can get folks there.
Awesome. All right. Well, Seth, our topic today is on storytelling, and we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about why storytelling matters, some of the building blocks and frameworks, like what makes a good story, the platforms that we believe you should be investing in 2025 to tell your stories. And then we'll end, of course, with some actionable takeaways. And I guess I'll just start by teeing this conversation up, Seth, by saying storytelling matters for both our internal and external audiences. And most of the time when I hear the conversation about storytelling discussed, it's very external focused and rightfully so. A student choosing where they enroll or an alum reflecting on their time in college, like the things that are sticking with either of those people aren't statistics. It's the stories. It's the bridge.
Totally.
Stories are the bridge. Like
Yeah.
what an institution does and how it's perceived, what exists in the middle, a story. So that, yes, absolutely storytelling matters for external, but I think that it matters just as much, if not more, internally too. And when we can shape narratives and share them with our faculty and staff and current students, that can have a really profound effect on institutional culture. It can foster pride, more alignment with institutional values, and all of that can often translate into better external engagement too. So if you stepped into this podcast thinking to yourself, storytelling doesn't matter, I hope that 60 seconds has changed your mind.
It does.
So let's dig into why. So why don't you kick us off, Seth? Why do you think storytelling matters?
So to me, in an increasingly crowded market, creative is increasingly important. Like, we see 4,000, 10,000 ads a day. None of us remember the ads that we've seen. Things are noisier than ever. And I think so, and at the same time that we're seeing like this high influx in like paid advertising, organic reach is way down. Like any of you that manage social accounts for your brands know that you got to pay to boost and pay to play and try to get in front of folks. And what's in the middle is storytelling and content that engages with folks, which is stuff that's getting served up by algorithms and platforms. And at the highest level, to me, the best content is telling a meaningful story, and it's emotionally engaging, and it's embodying of your brand. Like, we are not our brand if we're brand managers. Like, our brand is the experiences that people are having, the people that make up and are components of who we are. And their stories are our story. Our story is purely the summation of all the stories underneath us. And so often we like jump straight to the brand story. We try to tell it but like the brand story is just the summation of the story of its parts, right? And I think so often we tend to skip that step. And so to me, storytelling builds resonance. It's emotional. It also provides alternative voices, meaning it's not just coming from your authoritative voice as the brand that you might manage, but it's coming from real people, whether they're students or customers or alumni or advocates or supporters. And it just embodies your value propositions in a way that is so much more impactful than 8 words on a billboard. And I think like understanding and thinking about it from a more meaningful lens allows you to realize that like you usually almost always have to tell more stories. It's almost always the answer is like we need to do not just a better job, but do more to make sure that we are highlighting a wide variety of voices and providing the kind of interesting insights that only comes from truly great stories.
Yeah, it brings us back to that point about the institution's identity. And when we are in a crowded marketplace in higher ed, and it is the stories that differentiate and set your institution apart from the one that might just literally be down the street. And so it's the why behind the mission. It's turning our buildings from places on a Google map into places of purpose and belonging. And there's a business case to be made here. Like, emotional connections are not just feel-good moments. They're strategic assets. And
Totally.
I think Marcom people understand that. There are real business outcomes, more application numbers, better alumni giving, stronger student retention rates. Like, if people can see themselves reflected in your stories, they're more likely to engage with you wherever they are in their journey.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, especially if you're still coming at it from a lens of a traditional marketer trying to drive growth, ultimately one of the key factors in someone making a decision is perceived value, which is like really understanding like what's the perceived benefit versus the perceived cost of attending your institution, as an example. And that's the ultimate perceived value. And perceived value is highly subjective. And I think we rely way too much on objective facts to try to market what so often is an emotional decision. There's a reason why in our space in higher ed, there's the classic story, which is always like, I knew as soon as I stepped foot on campus, this is where I wanted to be.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right? And it's like, but it's true, right? Like for those of us that have done college tours, it's like a real thing. And it's like, well, hold on. How come the campus tour conveyed something that the website couldn't convey, that we can't convey that I just stepped on campus and it felt right? And the reason is because it's a feeling and it's emotional and it's not some objective stats about how you're 6th ranked U.S. News in the East for private institutions. Like, that's a good trust indicator, and that can help people make a better decision too. There's a place for that, but that is just so wildly different than personal emotional connections that come from storytelling. And I just think that we need to realize that that's a huge piece. And one thing that I would highlight is, like a key flaw I have found in storytelling in higher ed is we so often just tell the story of the brand, and we don't think about stories from a segmentation perspective. One thing I would encourage folks to do when they think about storytelling is like look at the variety of your value propositions and ask yourself about the stories that are available for each of those. So like if you want to talk about how you have an amazing study abroad program, can you show me? Like, can I hear the stories of people while they're there? If you talk about, the great athletic student experience can you actually bring that to life in a way that's dynamic and interesting and emotional and compelling, rather than just telling me you do? Because there's things that you can say, and then there's things that you can convey, and they're not the same thing, and they don't perform the same way from a marketing perspective.
All right, so then let's take this a step further and start talking about what are all of these building blocks for effective storytelling. Are there frameworks that we can look to? Are there certain elements that a compelling story always needs to have? And I think you just got onto something. Like, great stories are not just told, they're felt. And they inspire, and they are authentic. And gosh, we love that word, authenticity, but we seem to throw that word out there without ever really saying, okay, well, what is authentic? Because, we know people, we ourselves can spot something that's manufactured like a mile away. So when the story reflects that real experience and conveys the challenge or like the tribulation that the person went through and then overcame, then it can feel more authentic. And I think that if I pull up my old Stoner days and I channel Voltaire, a great story has to have conflict. It has to have a challenge. Otherwise, it's not a story.
Yeah, I told you, it's definitely the classic hero's journey is always a piece to it. I will say that I think social media has changed a slight bit of the hero's journey, which is that when you have to capture attention in the first 3 seconds, it's almost like you have to have this teaser and then revert back and unpack it. One of the pieces, though, I'll say too, on like a framework for storytelling is that, I heard this said by somebody on LinkedIn. I so apologize, I can't recall who. So if this is you, put it in a comment. But someone else said marketing is the manufacturing of authenticity. And I thought that was like really honest of like, look, you can be authentic and still manufacture it. And so like one of the best stories I think I ever told, actually, I'm pretty sure this is one of the ones that was nominated for an Emmy, which was we had a military student that was leaving school and was moving back to their home state. And they flew their wife and their daughter ahead, and they were driving a truck with their belongings cross country. We found out because I had met the student, and I asked if we could come along and film it. And so we literally put a camera operator in the truck with this military dad. He's driving across country. And he's talking about like what's going on as he transitions from school into professional life, and talking about what he learned at the institution where I was running marketing at the time, and like how his experience was. And it just created this framework where like, that was real. He was really moving cross country. Now, mind you, like we had a follow van with him, and we had a drone go up, and we said, hey, could you drive back and do that again? Like, it's still manufactured and structured. So it's like, don't be like you have to shoot things purely documentary style when you're telling a story. I think in this case, video. But like, think about how can you manufacture authenticity. Another example is always like back when I delivered those diplomas for Southern New Hampshire University now like 10 years ago, we went to students who missed graduation, delivered diplomas. That was manufactured. We set up the camera, we knocked on the door, but it was also real because that was actually the moment they were receiving their diploma. And so I think embracing the reality that you can manufacture authenticity and still pull it off is really important for folks who I think sometimes worry that like constraints in storytelling will make it inauthentic, which it can, but you can also tell a better story the more you plan and prepare for it.
I think another thing that makes for a good story is to have an aspirational tone. And I believe that aspirational tones inspire action, and that if a story can invite someone to see the art of the possible within themselves at your institution, then, right, it's going to encourage that person to imagine what their impact could be, to imagine what their future self could be. And it is Seth Godin who talks about this on his blog sometimes. And I think we actually may have referenced it at one point last year, but it's not just putting the stats of like today in front of that student. It's selling them. It's through the use of stories, what they can achieve to be. Like, what is that future self, and what's your institution's role in that, and how can you position your institution to be the only way, right, that they can get to that future self.
Don't just talk about AI, build it. Yes, you. Transform your institution with the next evolution of AI. Agents that don't just assist, they act. Learn from top experts and get actionable insights at the AI Engage Summit on February 25th through 26th. Virtual and free, this event is your ticket to an AI-powered future. Register now at enrollify.org/engage.
I totally, there's a common kind of phrase in advertising, like outside of our industry, but that every buyer is buying perceived improved quality of life, and every purchase is basically leading to that. And one of the things that I've talked about with my team before is that we are in the belief business, because by and large, what we sell is almost always a stepping stone, not an end state. There are a percentage of students who purely want to get a degree. They're a lifelong learner, and that's the end of their path. But for the vast majority, it's a belief that this experience and this outcome will lead to a broader outcome down the road. And it totally is the perception and confidence they have in the probability that that will happen, which is one of the reasons why like just alumni testimonials will always be such a strong component of really strong higher ed marketing campaigns, because it's actual people who have walked that actual path all the way through and can speak back and say, yes, I came here with this expectation, and yes, it came true for me. It's just such a powerful tool for folks to use.
So I'm a big frameworks person. I like to be proactive, not reactive. And I think a lot of times we get stuck when it comes to storytelling in a more reactive approach.
Yeah.
Right? Like we hear about this really cool thing that happened and now we have to go tell the story about it versus maybe the other way around. And so I think frameworks can help to ensure consistency and alignment to the institution's mission and goals, but it can also improve just scalability across the organization. So a good framework can be a great roadmap. My 3 favorite frameworks, I love Pixar, StoryBrand, and the ABT framework. Are you familiar with those, Seth?
Not the ABT, and actually not Pixar. I'd love to hit both of those at least at a minimum.
So Pixar's framework is very simple. It's rooted in the idea of once upon a time. So it's once upon a time there was, then you establish the norm every day until one day. And because of that, right? So there's your consequences, your challenges, until finally, and ever since then. And so when you use that framework, it's to build emotional connections and to create inspiring content versus the ABT framework, which is much simpler. It's just and, but, therefore. That's it. And that's a really good framework for short form storytelling, things that you need to communicate very quickly and persuasively and clearly.
Wow. Very cool. I love those. Thanks so much for sharing those.
Of course.
Yeah. I'll say this is not quite a framework, but one way that I frame my thinking around storytelling and the marketing we do is 2 questions that I think every marketer should consider, which is, where do you find your stories? And then where do you put them once you're ready to tell them? And the where do you find them piece is really like, we have a Canahoma casting offering that like we do a whole sourcing for how do we actually source stories. One big mistake in storytelling in higher ed is often I think we only tell the loudest voices because we wait people to tell us this great story and then we retell it. And so like once someone becomes like a cornerstone of a marketing campaign, it's like they're everywhere. But like, how are we actually sourcing stories that align with our value propositions, but then also potentially are coming from underrepresented voices or folks who may not raise their hand and say, I have a story to tell, but they actually do. And so how do we go out and find those stories and source those? And so I think that like having an intentional practice on that is important. On the flip side, for where do they go, I think it's really important because so often it's like, well, we're going to put these stories on our owned channels and communicate them to our own audiences. And that's fine. But I think for as marketers, rarely is our only job to communicate better to our existing community. More often than not, we're trying to grow it. And so when you think about it, I think you have to think about storytelling much differently. And so just one simple example of how I think about that is the audience of our audience is our primary audience, which means we know we can reach our audience, which is people in our community, but how do we reach people that are in their circle? You know, the vast majority of college students will go to an institution where they have some semblance of a connection, some family member, some friends, some neighbor, somebody from work or down the street or from church that went there, they hear about it. There's often some type of connection, and it's the network of your existing community where you have the most potential influence. And so way back when I used to still be a social media manager, we always valued tags and shares way disproportionately versus likes and comments, because if you get someone to share your post, they're providing you the distribution to the community they have the highest influence over. And to me, that was always the goal. So when you thought about storytelling, it wasn't just like even where would it go, it's where will it go from there, and thinking about that from really the outset of the work that you're doing.
So then, Seth, what platforms would you recommend for the storytellers who are listening? Because I think it is important to remember that the platform you're choosing is going to help shape how your story is received, and it's going to help shape how you're going to construct that story in some cases too.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And so, like any good question in marketing, the answer is it depends. And so if I can reframe it slightly, I will tell you where, the platforms that I am most bullish on right now by far and away is short form content. So it's specifically YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and TikTok. But then the second piece is short form content in the form of a multi-part series. It is unbelievable how much people are getting drawn into series that are either launched all at once, so you're just breaking up a video into little snippets, but also where you are time dropping. There are so many interesting content creators out there right now who are doing like dropping a different piece every day, and they're allowing you visibility into real time. Like I was just like riveted for like a couple months following this. There's a skateboarder who left Venice Beach and skateboarded to New York City, and he's like I'm just gonna skateboard to New York, and he like didn't totally realize like how big the country was, I think, and he was like very shocked by the Rocky Mountains, and like every day he's posting, and it was just so incredible. It's like, this would make a great video in 4 months if someone filmed the whole thing, but I consume so much more content because I followed his journey in real time. Like every day I was looking forward to that Instagram reel update to follow his experience. And so to me, short form, multi-part series, and as much as possible real time, and then worry about that packaged video later. That to me is something that is not breaking into our space much at all at the moment.
Yep, I love that. It just even at Enrollify, we're like experimenting with that a little bit with some of our playlist drops with Carrie's Lessons in Leadership and Eddie's I Want to Work There. In fact, we switched his podcast format to be a video first monthly playlist because of these types of insights. So yes, I co-sign that 100%. And maybe by no surprise, but I would say an underutilized platform in higher ed, but one that is very important is podcasting. I've talked to only a handful of folks in higher ed over the last year who are involved with podcasting on their campuses. And you know what? Like there is just something really intimate about hearing a story in someone's own voice, and especially when it can be that current student or the alum who's like reminiscing about their college years, right? Or like the student who's talking about how they've grown, or like the things that they're doing on campus day to day. Like maybe you mash those two ideas up together. Like there's a lot of powerful opportunity for content there. And then podcasts can also give like some depth and connection and like a personal touch that just written words can't.
I totally agree. I would also add that like the area to me that's the biggest opportunity in podcasts for higher ed is in niching down as far as possible. There's like a saying in business, niches get riches, which is the idea of like the more niche down you get, the faster you can grow and the faster you can build a brand for having expertise. And I would love to see more institutions be like, okay, not just launching like an overall institution-wide podcast where you're reaching your current audience, but saying like maybe we have a very strong school of engineering. We're going to drill all the way down to one type of engineering, and we're going to create a podcast with 2 or 3 faculty members on a very specific subject and demonstrate that level of expertise. When you tell everybody we're the best in the country at this certain subject, like show that and build like community and more reputation around that area of study. So in particular, I would love to see more schools rolling out niche down podcasts down to real nuanced specific areas within their academic portfolio.
All right, Seth, let's wrap this up with some actionable takeaways. And I'll kick us off. I'll say for our Marcom pros and our storytellers listening who are maybe hearing these recommendations and saying, hey, I don't have a big budget or a big team to do things like launch podcasts or create all of this video content. I think the reality is we can start small. It's like mentioned last week with Adam Grant, like a baby step is still a step forward, and a bunch of baby steps forward equal one big step forward. So launch the pilot storytelling podcast. Use free or low cost tools like, do it as your skunkworks project. Get the students out there doing the Instagram stories about their day-to-day campus life. Like, you've got incredible storytellers on your campus, and especially in the last 10 years, the amount of talented students that are walking in our doors with a lot of these skill sets can help to augment maybe some of the staffing shortage of skill sets around this area. So lean into student generated content and just start small. Just take a baby step every single day.
I love it. My advice to everyone would be to do a casting call. You can do it yourselves. All you got to do is create a Google survey based on your value propositions and then email it to your students and alumni just to source more stories. Like, people will raise their hand and share their voice. I cannot stress how much that's important. Like, refresh the ingredients in your pantry, the stories that are available to be told. And it is easier to do that than ever. Like, very in the weeds, but this is what we agreed to share on this podcast. Like, I'm actively exploring how we can leverage an AI interview platform. So when we do the casting, people can record themselves answering the questions for us. And it's a different approach and application for an AI interview platform, but there's a way to do a casting call where you can get submissions in seamlessly with no burden on the student or the alumni. And you can immediately be sitting on just like a pantry full of amazing stories, and you can go make something really great.
I love it. So sometimes we get lucky and sometimes we plan things out, and I'm just going to categorize this one under the we got lucky here. So starting on Thursday, we have a new 5-part Pulse Check series on strategic storytelling. And Maria Kuntz, the Director of Creative Communications and Services within University Advancement at the University of Colorado Boulder, is leading this conversation. She's going to explore why every message needs to be rooted in strategy and storytelling, how to go and build and lead a storytelling focused team, where the role of artificial intelligence is in all of this, and much more. We have been planning this for months, y'all, and it just happened to all line up this week.
I love it. It's great when that happens.
Too. I know. So her first episode on Thursday, don't miss it, because she is talking to Matt McFadden, the SVP at Simpson Scarborough, on why universities are mega brands and what we can learn from values-based marketing behemoths like Nike around storytelling. So if you have not subscribed to this feed yet, please do. Don't forget, last week, we're like, pretty please leave us a review. That would still be great, but definitely hit subscribe so you do not miss Maria's Pulse Check series.
Love it. Well, Mallory, it's always great seeing you.
Likewise, Seth. Until next week, happy MLK Day, everyone, and
Absolutely.
Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Bye-bye. The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.